I'm Josh Levinson from the Compassionate Koʻolaupoko Steering Committee, and I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Ka'anohi Kalama-Macomber is a mother of three from Koʻolaupoko, Oahu. She is a kumuhula and the Nā Hopena Aʻo Education Specialist for the Hawaii Department of Education's Office of Hawaiian Education. Before joining the department, Ka'anohi worked for a local Aina-based nonprofit as a community organizer and educator. Ka'anohi supports the department in building stronger connections between schools and their communities in order to make learning more relevant and ultimately more meaningful for all. Please welcome Ka'anohi Kalama-Macomber.
Mahalo so much for inviting me to come in and share space with all of you today. I'm sharing my screen here with you in hopes to be able to provide you folks some supports and provide you with some resources to further strengthen our communities and to further strengthen Koʻolaupoko. That oli that I just shared with you is one part of the Oli Aloha written by Lahipaki and put to leo by my grandmother, Ka'anohi Kalama. It was shared with the world for the first time at the East West Center at UH Manoa by my grandmother, and then she was later tasked with carrying it across this world, across this earth, to many places of peace, many places of healing, and many places that are really, really focused in on building and strengthening communities alike. So mahalo nui for that leo. In this first part of the oli, it's really reminding us that as Hawaii, we are to be kind and we are to be together. I know there's a lot of you on this call who are currently doing work with Pono Shim, with Foundations of Aloha and learning more about this word. And so you may know some of the things that I'm talking about right now. Lokahi is telling us that we need to do everything in unity with one another and recognize that we are a community and not individuals. Olu Olu saying to be pleasant-minded and to be welcoming of one another's spirits and one another's thoughts and feelings, and Ha'aha'a saying that we're not in this alone, that there's always more to grow, to be humble. While Ahonui is reminding us that while struggles may come our way, as long as we're tethering to one another and having patience, we will truly persevere. So aloha kako, I'm Ka'anohi Kalama-Macomber, and I am currently a resident raising my ohana in Waimanalo, Oahu, I'm born and raised in Kailua. I'm one of many, many grandchildren to Kekauʻilani and Charlie Kalama, growing up right there on Kawailua Road, across from Kailua Beach. And I mahalo you folks for allowing me to visit with you in this space. I want to open us up and with an activity. And so I know I was sharing my screen, but I'm going to stop sharing real quick. And I'm going to ask that Candice get ready the breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, I'm going to ask you folks to share 3 inoa, or 2 inoa and 1 story. Sorry. The 2 inoa, the 2 names that you're going to be sharing is going to be your name and the name of your aina. And the 1 moʻolelo that you're going to be sharing, and when I say moʻolelo, I mean really short story, yeah, like 30-second story with your group. The 1 moʻolelo that you're going to be sharing is the story of your weather. What is your weather like today? And this isn't the weather outside, this is the weather within you. So using weather descriptions and using that sort of terminology and Hawaii-based weather patterns, what are you feeling like right now? And as you share that, I'd like to also invite you to share 1 blue sky moment. What is that thing that you are tethering to? That moment that you really hold on to that reminds you that there's hope ahead. It serves as a symbol of hope for you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen one more time so you can see what I'm asking you to do. You're going to share 2 names, your name, the name of your aina, the name of your place, and 1 story. What is your weather like today? The weather within you. And what is 1 blue sky moment that you hold on to as a symbol of hope? Okay, I'm going to give you 1 example and then you folks will go off and do it yourselves. So again, I'm Ka'anohi, my place is Koʻolaupoko, Oahu, and my weather today is really still. I'm uncertain of what's ahead. There's a lot of stuff going on and I'm in that moment right before it's either going to storm or the sunshine is going to burst through and I'm not sure what's going to happen next. But my blue sky moment that I tether to all the time are the smiles on the faces of my 3 sons. That's currently and always embedded in my mind. Aloha, everyone. As you're coming back, I'd like to share with you just kind of where this practice comes from. So many of you know Auntie Puanani Burgess Kalamai. Many of you know Auntie Puanani Burgess. She's the author of Building the Beloved Community, among many other things. And she has shared this practice with us, the ceremony of the weather ball and the blue sky moment. And what she says is that it's a diagnostic, right? It's an opportunity for us to really get to know where people are at when they're coming into our spaces. And it takes us deeper than, oh, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. And then we continue on with our day, right? It really gets the person who's sharing their feeling to really stop and think, how am I doing? And how do I describe that to someone, right? In a way where they'll understand me, they'll get it. And as a listener, what is this person telling me? As in reference to how I should maybe support this person moving forward, or how we might engage with one another today in this class, in this experience that we're having with each other, and so on and so forth, right? When we share our weather, we're really describing what's happening within us, and helping people to kind of give them a heads up, like, this is what's going on with me, right? While my weather was kind of still, the other day it was a tornado. I felt like everything was sucking me in and pushing me out, and I was just really drained. And so that was my way to tell my coworkers, like, I really just don't have the energy today, right? Without coming out and saying, guys, no, I can't do this. And so this offers us an opportunity to really kind of get what Auntie Puanani says, get below the pico, right? To go a little bit deeper with one another, and deepen our relationships and our understandings of where each other are at. And when we talk about social emotional learning and Nā Hopena Aʻo and just creating thriving environments and communities, it's all about deepening and strengthening our connections to one another and to all of our places. And we do that through the telling of moʻolelo. So when you folks shared the moʻolelo, when you shared your name and you shared the name of your place and then your weather, you were sharing 3 separate stories in that, right? In sharing your name, you're telling your genealogy, you're telling you're coming into life. You're telling maybe the hopes and dreams that your family might have had for you as they named you that, right? All without having to say a single thing other than just your name. When you tell the name of your aina, you're sharing with us these places that have nurtured you for so many years, and these spaces that really help to mold you into the person that we see in front of us today. Yeah. And then of course the weather and the blue sky moment tells us this is what you're feeling right now, and these are some things that are important to you that we might be able to tether to as we build together in the future, right? Mo'olelo are stories, their histories, their genealogies. They are what inform us in our present in order to make the best possible future for generations to come. And what they ultimately do is they help us to build connections. They help us to build pilina to one another and to our places. Pilina are these connections that really stick, not loose connections, but connections that are really, really meaningful. And these connections are what inform how we want to move forward with one another, right? And how we want to design. If we are educators, then these connections are helping us to determine how we want to set up our classroom spaces, really making sure that when we're designing our spaces and these learning environments, understanding that every situation that we find ourselves in is an opportunity for learning. When we're designing in that way, we allow ourselves the opportunity to be able to truly deepen our relationships with each other and deepen our relationships to the content. It's telling us that if our students cannot connect to the mo'olelo, to the stories of the content that we're giving them, then they're never really going to make meaning out of it outside of our classrooms, outside of their learning spaces. And we as adults are the same way. If we cannot connect to what we're learning, then there's no sense of purpose there, right? There's no sense of identity that is connected to that content. And so it has no meaning for us. We don't see its usability. We don't see its value in our life anywhere outside of that single space. And so how are we utilizing the moʻolelo of ourselves, of the people around us, and of this place that we are living, teaching, and thriving in to really, really guide how we engage with one another, to really guide what we're doing and how we design all of our experiences. I'm gonna put a link in the chat and it is to Mentimeter, and I'm gonna ask all of you to please go ahead and take a moment to open it up. And when you do that, you're gonna see a question, which I will share on the slide deck with you. So here is the link. You're gonna go to www.menti.com. It's in the chat. And when you open that up, you will see a presentation that's gonna ask you, what are the conditions and attributes that make Hawaii truly, truly unique, unlike any other place in the world, right? What are those conditions? Not just, oh, it's pretty flowers, but what are the conditions that make Hawaii unique? You can go anywhere in the world, but you know you're in Hawaii because of what? So with a single word, you have three opportunities to type in a single word that represents a condition that makes Hawaii truly unique. So go ahead and take 2 minutes to fill that out. And I will pop it up on the screen for everyone to be able to see it. So as you see here, this word cloud is forming. These are the conditions that you folks are saying are really, really important and make this place home for you, right? Aloha, the people, the culture, the moʻolelo, the history, the language, the mana, the kindness, pigeon even, taking care of one another, interconnectedness. And if we know anything about word clouds, we know that the bigger the word is, the more people are inputting that word. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's more important, right? Because if we think about Nā Hopena Aʻo, Nā Hopena Aʻo is forcing us to look at things from multiple perspectives and from multiple moʻolelo, right? And acknowledging that there are multiple ways to say the same thing. And so aloha may be showing up in those words in the perimeter, and it might just look a little bit different, because in my community, aloha looks a little bit different, sounds a little bit different, and is spelt a little bit different, maybe. Right? We're really recognizing that while aloha is right there dead in the center, that is the foundation of everything that we're doing, there are a lot of things that truly support that and are just as important to us, to grounding us to this unique place in which we live. But recognizing that every word in this word cloud is important, it was the bottom line of what I was trying to say. You will be getting a snapshot of this word cloud in the slide deck that compassionate Koʻolaupoko will be sharing back with you folks. But and I want to encourage you folks to look back to it, to use this as kind of your guidance of, if these are the conditions that we're saying make Hawaii special, how are we including these conditions into the ways that we design to create whole communities, right? To create whole individuals and truly nurture total well-being and the total aloha within each individual and all of the spaces that we interact with. Nā Hopena Aʻo came, if you folks don't mind, every time I stop sharing, I lose this. So I'm just gonna leave it right like this. You can see it fine, yes? Okay. Nā Hopena Aʻo came to the system at a time where it was really, you know, there was really a disconnect for students, and they were having a really hard time. And this was during a time of race to the top, no child left behind, and all of these initiatives that really divided our communities. And so a task force got together and they began to talk about, you know, how do we create something that can uplift the uniqueness of Hawaii and that can really honor all of Hawaii's gifts. And they started thinking that they might create a Hawaiian GLOs, and then realized that that'll just further support this idea that there's only one definition of success. And what they recognized was part of Hawaii's gift is that there is room for multiple definitions of success and multiple ways for people to look at learning through the lens of their gifts. And so what they wanted to create instead was a framework of guiding principles that would really allow us to say that the inputs, the conditions that we're designing for in our learning environments are what are going to create opportunities for learning to truly stick, so that the output is a strengthened sense of breath, right? A strengthened sense of belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being in Hawaiʻi. What they were noticing, the conditions that were currently in the system was really a focus on the individual, where we're measuring academic achievement using standards-based models, right? Community is separated from schools. There's not a lot of integration. And we're saying we really need to get back to what is really truly Hawaiʻi. And what's really truly Hawaiʻi is this concept that communities have thrived for generations through this practice of A'o, through this practice of teaching and learning, right? Teaching and learning reciprocally with one another and with our aina. That communities really were able to interact through multiple layers of context in an ecosystem that really fostered that level of reciprocity between Kanaka, aina, and one another, right? And so how do we get back to that? How do we create spaces in our classrooms, in our state agencies, in our communities that really are reminiscent of those unique attributes and dispositions of Hawaiʻi? And the way that they thought would be best beneficial is if everybody adopted this understanding that the conditions of breath are what's needed to be inputted into all of our experiences. Nā Hopena Aʻo literally mean the end goals of teaching and learning, right? Understanding that every single one of us on this call are serve as a teacher and a learner at every point in our lives, right? So how do we look to a kindergartner and make sure that a kindergartner knows that he or she is teaching me every single day and not only sitting there as the student? How do we look to our kupuna and recognize when they're telling us that they still have more to learn, right? And then how do we humble ourselves enough to continue to go on that journey together? Nā Hopena Aʻo is really asking us to acknowledge that our learning environments are what are most crucial. And when we're thinking about developing the social and emotional stability of the future generations, we need to first take a look at the environments that we're creating for them to feel comfortable and feel belonging, a sense of belonging to, right? Like I said, Nā Hopena Aʻo tells us that it's a strengthened sense of belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being, and ha is that breath that gives us life. So if we're doing all of this and we're inputting these values and designing for these types of conditions in our learning environments, then the hope is that it'll eventually lead to stronger breath, stronger life, stronger, more meaningful life for everyone in Hawaii and beyond. I'm going to go ahead and play this video for you folks, and some of you may have seen it, and it is of Auntie Puanani talking about her work in building the beloved community. But what I really want you to listen to the story that she's telling about this young man who is trying to figure out what his gift is.
So this story is for you guys. So I do a process called Building the Beloved Community, and in that I ask people to tell stories. And so I did this with a group of 11th and 12th graders at Hawaiian High School. So the 3 stories I asked people to tell is first to tell the story of all of your names. When you tell the story of your name, you tell the story of your family, of your people, what they thought about you, what they hoped for you. And then I asked them to tell the story of what is your community, however you live as part of a group. Whatever that definition is, tell that story. And then third, I asked them to tell the story of their gift. So at a table, just like where you folks are seated, there were 11 young people, 11th and 12th graders. So we went around the table and everybody told their 3 stories until we came to this one young guy. When it was his turn to tell the story of his names, he clammed up. He said, "What, miss? What kind of gift you think I get? I stay in this freaking special ed class. I have a hard time reading. I cannot do that math stuff. And why you make me shameful ask me that kind of question? What's your gift? If I had gift, you think I'd be here?" So he just shut up. And I felt shame because I made him shame. So I shut up and I started to collect all my stuff and put them back in the bag. And all I wanted to do is take off, never say sorry, we never debrief, we never feedback, I never hear what they thought about it. But you know, in every community, there's always some place where you're going to see everybody you like to see and everybody you never want to see again. So in Waianae, one of those places is Tamura Store. I'm going in Tamura Store with my wagon, and I see that boy, and his back is faced toward me, and all I can think of is, run. So I'm trying to back up, and I try not to bang nothing, because I don't want him to turn around and look at me and yell at me. So he turns around, and he looks at me straight. He opens his arms like this, and he says, Auntie. So I went from Miss to Auntie. Auntie, I've been thinking about you. Please, I've been thinking, my gift, what my gift? That Auntie told me I had one gift you. So I better find him, Auntie. I'm thinking. So I look up at him and I asked him, so brother, what's your gift? He said, you know, your hard time, that math stuff, and it's hard for me, but Auntie, on the ocean, I can call fish. And a fish, he comes every time. Every time I can put food on that. And sometimes when I stay in the ocean, the shark, he come, you know, and he look at me, and I look at him, and I tell him, Uncle, I'm not going to take plenty fish. I'm going to take 1, 2, just for my family. All the rest I leave for you. So the shark, he tell me, are you cool, brother? And I tell the shark, are you cool? The shark, he go his way, you know, Auntie. I go my way. I think that's my gift. So when I work with educators, when I work with various parts of the education field, I ask them the question, what would have happened to this boy if our school was gift-based? If I knew what the gift of every one of our children was, and we taught to that gift, what would that boy's life have been like? Because right now, this boy is rubbish. The things that he knows, can you imagine being able to talk to the fish, and they can talk back to him, and him know in perfect harmony what they need and what they're saying. And we have to remember, when we say Aloha kako, kako means not just the two-legged. It's all those out there. Kako is them also. So how do we begin to make our school be gift-based? What is the gift of every one of you? And I wish I had that story while I was raising my children. I would have gone to find the gift of my children and aimed resources and attention to that. So I ask you that question as a way for you folks to start thinking about how, in whatever place you land, how do you use gifts as a basis for figuring out what we do and how we move forward together? So, thank you.
So I share that video with you folks because when we're talking about Nā Hopena Aʻo and this uplifting of conditions, Auntie Puanani is really sharing with us the importance of the condition of an open invitation. Yeah, an open invitation to really be who you are. And to bring your story to the table. Earlier in the smaller breakout rooms, there was that open invitation for you folks to share your story. And maybe you might not have been comfortable at that time to do it, but hopefully it would have increased your comfort level to do this practice in the future, right? That open invitation is telling us that there's a space on this table for each and every one of you, and we want to figure out how we can best support you and what your needs are, what you like to eat, and how we can pupa'akai together, how we can all eat together and really partake and be fulfilled together, right? When she's talking about getting to know the story of this young man and getting to know his gift, it's really taking the time to figure out what is his weather like each and every day and what are his blue sky moments, right? If he had shared that, he might have said his blue sky moment is every day that he catches a fish and is able to feed his ohana, right? But we wouldn't know that if we're not taking the time to get to know those mo'olelo. I told you folks in the beginning that mo'olelo are really the foundation because the purpose of all of this is to build and strengthen pilina. And if we're not doing that, then we cannot really create programs that are genuinely strengthening the social and emotional well-being of everybody involved. Maybe for the moment, maybe it's a band-aid. But to give them practices that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives looks a little bit different, right? And if we're not including time, designated time to get to know those stories on a deeper level and to really get to know our communities on a deeper level, then we're not truly creating social and emotional support that is going to last lifetimes. For Nā Hopena Aʻo, it really asks us with a sense of belonging, right? It's a relationship that cannot be undone. We're standing firm in our position, knowing who we are in relationship to everyone and everything else around us, right? This sense of belonging is really asking us, how are we creating the environments where every individual sees him or herself as a part of the moʻolelo, of the collective moʻolelo, and really feels nurtured in that space? Please excuse the neighborhood dogs. And really feels nurtured in that space, right? What are you folks doing in your capacity to create that open invitation, to create the opportunity for everyone to come inside the door and really be with you and be who they are with all of you? How are we doing that in our classrooms? How are we doing that in our workforce? How are we doing that just outside in general? Right? This is a picture of Waimanalo Limuhui celebrating Koʻolaupoko today, yeah? So all the pictures you see are gonna be Koʻolau photos. But this is Waimanalo Limuhui doing something that we do all the time and oftentimes overlook, right? When we come together and we hold hands with one another and we create this circle, we're making an unspoken promise to one another that we are here in the present with one another, giving and receiving from one another, to and from one another, right? And so how do we bring back the sanctity of these types of practices? So when we're doing it with children who may not have this in their everyday lives, they see it as something that's truly grounding and allows them to recognize that I am somebody, and I have something to say, and I have something to offer, right? I have value in this space here with all of you. Responsibility is saying in working one learns, through initiative one acquires, and we're going to carry our responsibilities as it is our privilege, right? So this is really important. With kids nowadays, they get really upset if they get told to do something because it's a chore. And yeah, keiki need to learn kuleana, but they also need to learn the lesson behind it so they can see it as a privilege. So they can see it as an honor because they know that it's benefiting not just themselves, but a greater collective beyond themselves, right? So how are we creating these opportunities where responsibility can be seen as that sort of privilege and honor because they're truly connecting to the work, and it's not just busy work, but it's work that is meaningful because it's work that is built off of their mo'olelo and the mo'olelo of their places. Yeah. How do we continue to recreate these smiles and this level of enjoyment in a hana that can be really cumbersome and can really hurt your back? But in the end, we're still smiling because we know that we're doing something good for ourselves. It's fulfilling our souls, and it's also helping our communities. What are some things that we might do that can create these types of environments where children begin to feel a sense of worth and feel like they have something to provide their community, not just as a result of being a punishment, right? A negative reinforcement, but rather a positive reinforcement saying, you guys have to do this, but look at everything you're doing for your community as a result of getting to do this. So then their story soon changes to from I have to do this to I get to do this. How do we create those types of environments? Excellence tells us that there's no success without preparation, and that we're going to persevere along the appropriate path with the right skills necessary. This is really where that gift-based system comes into play, right? It's saying that I'm going to persevere along my path with the right skills that I need to succeed, not necessarily with what skills my neighbor needs to succeed, right? Because our stories are very different. What success looks like in my household is going to be very different than what success looks like in another one. And it should be, because we're very different individuals. We come from very different backgrounds and very different stories. And so how are we acknowledging that? And like Auntie Puanani said, getting to know those gifts and teaching to those gifts, tailoring our environments to acknowledge that there is a place for everyone on this va'a. Everyone can have a kuleana, and that kuleana is going to be tailored to his or her gifts. Because when we do it that way, everyone succeeds and the va'a can holo, right? If we have anybody, even just a single person sitting on the side who doesn't recognize his or her gift and isn't able to contribute, that va'a is going to go slower, or might not even move at all, because there might be a very, very, very important task that isn't getting taken care of, all because that student wasn't made to see that he or she holds that gift to fulfill that kuleana, right? How are we supporting this gift-based system? And when I say system, I don't just mean the formal education system. I mean our system-wide Hawaiʻi, a gift-based system where everyone is able to recognize their gift, value it, and really look at life through the lens of those gifts. What are the gifts of each and every one of you on this call? What are the gifts of your community? When we're talking about creating trauma-informed practices and social emotional support through this, this group of compassionate Koʻolaupoko, how might we assemble all of the gifts that we have on this call so everyone can komoe kahana completely and fully and wholeheartedly, can really get into the work and make it meaningful for our community? Aloha, like I told you before, is really letting us know that we're doing everything with love, so that good results may fall upon every single person, and every place in my community, my family, and the world. When I say love, though, and when I say aloha, it's not just that single definition of the word, right? It's those 5 facets that I shared with you in the opening. And it's recognizing that if we practice at least one of these and we really focus on it each and every day, we would have a much better world to live in, because everybody would be dedicated to that level of kindness, that level of humility, celebration of the whole, the collective, and patience to know that we will get through everything, that this too shall pass, right? Because we're doing it together, because we see that blue sky moment at the end of the tunnel. Aloha is asking us, how are we creating conditions like this in our photo with Ho'okua'aina, where aloha is truly uplifted as the rule, that no matter who comes through my gates, I'm gonna welcome you the same way every single time, because that's how Hawaiʻi does Hawaiʻi, right? No matter what you look like, no matter what your abilities are, there is a place for you here. If any of you know anything about Ho'okua'aina, it is a very, very deep lo'i. So a little boy like this, he would be drowning. But we're gonna find a place where he can truly learn and truly connect and not feel overwhelmed, but feel a sense of purpose, right? There's a place for everyone in this work. How do we create environments where children are beginning to realize that aloha is so much bigger than just the word itself, but it's an action, it's a way of life, right? And when we're giving everything with aloha as a rule for how we live our lives, it will be reciprocated naturally. How do we continue to perpetuate that? Total well-being tells us that love is imperative, and we're going to nurture our mind, body, and spirit for a positive and healthy life, right? And really, it's getting us to think about the past, the present, and the future. How are we creating environments that build healthy relationships and really simplify, get back to basics, recognizing that Hawaii is abundant. Hawaii has everything that we need if we just get back to the basics and feed from Hawaii, nurture from Hawaii, heal from Hawaii. Yeah, Hawaii can rejuvenate us, mind, body, and soul, if we allow it to. And so how are we utilizing those resources to support that? How are we taking all of the resources that are provided to us from elsewhere as supports, but really grounding ourselves with the resources that we have right here at home? And then how are we creating conditions where self-checks are the norm, where it's a part of our livelihood to constantly ask ourselves, what would our kupuna do in this situation? If I do this right now, is it what's best for my family in this situation? And what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind, right? If we think about that with every single decision that we make, from the food that we put into our mouths to the words that come out of them, imagine what kind of world we might have and what kinds of people we might be growing. And last but not least, Hawaii says that this is my prized place, and that we show our love and appreciation for our beloved home because this is our home. Whether we're from here or not, and whether we are Hawaiian or not, this is still the place that we have chosen to live, where we are living in this time. And so we must, and we all have a kuleana to care for it, right? And to uplift it and to uplift its rich history, and its olelo even. Hawaii is saying, how are we uplifting the abundance of our communities? The multiple stories of the people and places, from the host culture to the multicultural societies that live here in Hawaii. So everyone's story is seen. So everyone's story is connected, because the one thing that we all do have in common, no matter where we come from, is Hawaii. And so how do we tether to that thread? How do we make Hawaii be our blue sky moment, right? If any of you have watched the 5-minute Nā Hopena Aʻo video at the end, Kaz Farias says, what now's the time to do something so 50 years from now, we still have Hawaii to come home to, right? That's the blue sky moment, to have Hawaii for generations to come. But we cannot do that if we're not making space for everyone to truly honor and embrace Hawaii, right? It needs to show up in everything that we're doing, across all levels of government, across all levels of state and practice and society, so that we can all come together, alulike, to malama, this place that we call home, and create meaningful learning opportunities as we continue to grow. Yeah. Nā Hopena Aʻo is really asking us to shift, to support a shift from a me to a we space, right? This shift from an individualistic perspective to a collective perspective. And it's creating the conditions and the environments that support that kind of shift. You guys will get this slide later, so you can dig into it a little bit later. But it creates the conditions that can support that shift, right? So when we look at an image like this, and we see the questions of what are the conditions that really produce the outcomes that we desire for Hawaii, for our youth? What are these inputs? And it's not to say that the picture on the left is better than the picture on the right. They're just two different situations. And one needs something that the other has, right? And so how might we nurture those conditions so no matter what side you're standing on, you still feel fulfilled and supported and guided by a community that has your back? Right? What are the indicators that tell us that students are succeeding, that kupuna are succeeding, that our communities are succeeding? What are the indicators that tell us that it's not? How might we shift the conditions that we're putting into experiences so that they can thrive? So when we think of Ha as that ecosystem, it's because Ha is telling us that the inputs we're putting in are conditions that foster breath. And that's the air that we breathe, that's the sounds that we hear, that's the food that we taste. That's the soil, the nutrients in the soil that help our plants to grow, right? And if we do things in that way, then the result will be individuals that are full of breath, right? And so when you think about your context and when you folks are doing the work that you're doing in your individual spaces, how are you being mindful about the conditions that you put into place? To contribute to the environments that you're creating, that you're developing, that you're nurturing? And how do we help everyone to see that our situation is just our situation? And sometimes you cannot help it, right? We cannot help where we live sometimes, but that's okay. How do we pay attention to the strengths of where we live? How do we uplift all of the gifts of where we live and the positives in our situation and the value that we bring into this world? That's where the social and emotional strengthening comes into play. But students aren't going to be able to do that. Children aren't going to be able to do that if they don't first feel a sense of belonging and an understanding to where they fit in the grand scheme of the whole and a connection to this place that they're living. So with that, I'm going to ask you folks to go to the Mentimeter one more time. I'm going to stop sharing. To go to the Mentimeter one more time and answer the second question, which is saying, when you think about the conditions necessary for an ecosystem to truly thrive, what is one environment that you would like to create immediately in your practice to strengthen breath for your community? Which we're saying, if students have a strengthened sense of breath, then their social and emotional well-being will really strengthen as well, right? They go hand in hand. And so I'll give you folks a couple of minutes to do that. And while you're doing that, I will share my screen so you can see what some of your peers are sharing. And this too will be shared out with the slide deck. It'll all be tacked on to the slides that I shared today. So we have here deeper pilina, environments that really foster deeper pilina, where people feel less isolated and feel inspired, right through mo'olelo. That's how we inspire them, getting them to tell mo'olelo and hear mo'olelo. Hopefully some of you felt inspired by some of the blue sky moments you shared earlier, right? Open-ended, unconditional, continuous invitation. Yes, Nā Hopena Aʻo is all about the invitation. If you work at a school and we've never come to you, it's because your school hasn't invited us, right? We're not going to go anywhere that we're not invited. Because you need to be ready. You need to be ready for it. You need to have an open mind. And so that open invitation is really important. And we encourage everybody to do the same with the people that they're working with. To force someone to do it is just going to demean the meaningfulness that they might get out of that experience. And so how do we make sure that everyone feels invited to the spaces and to the work that we're doing together? Strengthening ohana. Yeah, these are beautiful. Collaboration, voice and choice, safe environment. So SEL is there and they know they have someone to talk to, that someone to turn to because they know someone cares about their story, right? And is asking them on a regular basis about that story. Identifying gifts and strengthening, having a voice, feeling at home, recognizing that this is our home and we need to make it such, and so it needs to show up in all of our spaces too, right? So it goes on and on and on, and you folks will be able to see it when you get this back. But I want to mahalo you for contributing to this space, and I'll be on for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask me. But really want to leave you folks with my closing mana'o of, Nā Hopena Aʻo, like I said earlier, is all about mo'olelo, and it's about building relationships. And we say that it's the ecosystem for successful social and emotional support and learning and trauma-informed care, because it's the first thing that you need to do before you can even try to work with anybody. I had a student who was telling me about his counseling that he was going through, and he said, I just really couldn't open up. And I said, why? And he said, because she was asking me so much about everybody else, she never asked me about me, And I said, wow, like you would think in counseling, that's the first thing you ask is about you. But she was so focused on getting to the heart of the issue, which was mom and dad fighting and wanting to know if mom and dad were feeding him any sort of negative information. That was the purpose of the counseling session, right? That she forgot to take time to get to know him first. And so really, an encouragement to all of us, take the time, get to know the mo'olelo, get to know the mo'olelo of your friends, get to know the gifts of everyone around you, because one day you're going to need to tap onto those gifts. Yeah. And one day they're going to need to tap onto yours. So share your gifts. It's an uncomfortable thing for people sometimes to say, oh, I'm gifted in this. But it's not ho'oyo. It's not something that you should feel conceited about. It's something that you should be recognizing, right? So you're communicating to everyone that I know I have value. Yeah. And when you do that, you lead by example and you open up the space for someone else to do the same. So with that, mahalo nui a oko pakahia po, mahalo so much. My contact information and Ohe's hub with a bunch of resources to support Hawaiʻi is at the bottom of the slide deck that you folks will receive. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or any needs for support. We'll come for one, we'll come for 1,000, whatever your need is, we're here for you. Mahalo nui. Aloha.